Airport Injustice. A Mother's Honor Chapter 1. A Journey of Healing. The early morning sun peeked through the slats of the Venetian blinds, casting long shadows on the worn hardwood floor of a modest two-story home on the outskirts of Montgomery, Alabama. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily, almost in rhythm with the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Everything felt still, except for the woman standing by the window. Evelyn Carter, 74, stood in her housecoat, clutching a steaming mug of herbal tea in her trembling hands. Her reflection in the glass didn't look like the woman she remembered from years ago. Her soft brown skin had deepened with wrinkles and time, and her once black hair was now a crown of silver, wrapped neatly in a satin scarf. But her eyes, they were still strong, still proud, still full of quiet fire. She glanced at her suitcase by the door. Neatly packed, checked twice. The flight was at 10:45 a.m., and her son had arranged everything. She hadn't flown in over 20 years, but this trip wasn't just a vacation. It was necessary. It was overdue. Evelyn's oldest friend, Margie, had passed away just last month in Oakland, California. The funeral had already been held. She wasn't well enough then to travel. But Margie's daughter insisted Evelyn come visit, stay a while, and help pack up her old house. Evelyn had agreed. She needed closure. She needed to say goodbye. Her arthritic fingers trembled as she reached for her cell phone and opened a message from her son. "Driver's outside at 7:30. I'll track your flight. Text me if anything goes wrong. Love you, Mama." Her son, General Thomas Carter, was a name known in defense circles, but he was just Tommy to her, always had been. Born and raised on values, he'd worked hard, built a career that took him from JROTC to the Pentagon. He tried every week to get her to move in with him. But Evelyn was a woman of her roots, and stubborn as a mule. When she needed to be at 7:28 a.m., she stepped outside with her suitcase. The driver was there, a young man named Kyle, who offered a gentle smile and opened the door like she was royalty. It was a warm, southern summer morning. Cicadas buzzed softly, and the air smelled of honeysuckle and distant cut grass. The drive to the airport was quiet, just the occasional exchange of small talk. Evelyn always believed silence was not something to fill, it was something to share. When they reached the airport, she gave Kyle a warm thank you and a $20 tip he tried to decline. She insisted. Inside, she felt the familiar rush of anxiety, lines of people, TSA signs, blinking departure boards. She clutched her purse and walked with calm determination. She had her boarding pass, her ID, her travel-size toiletries were exactly as the airline required, no bells, no whistles. She even wore slip-on shoes for security. But as she moved toward the checkpoint, something shifted. A set of eyes followed her. A man in a uniform stood near the metal detector's Officer Raymond Locke. He was tall, mid-40s, with a stern jawline and a military-style buzz cut. His eyes didn't scan the crowd like other officers. They hunted, targeted, chose. He saw Evelyn, a black woman, alone, elderly, vulnerable. She didn't see him at first. She was focused on the routine, taking off her shoes, placing her purse in the tray, sliding her carry-on bag onto the belt. But as she walked through the scanner and collected her items, she noticed him stepping closer, unsmiling, cold. "Ma'am, can you step to the side for a moment?" he asked. Evelyn blinked. "Is something wrong?" "Just a random check, routine." She had nothing to hide. But the moment his gloved hands took her purse without asking, something in her gut twisted. A second officer joined. A woman this time. Blonde, younger. Looked uncomfortable but followed orders. Officer Locke rifled through her purse, two roughly pulling tissues, a compact Bible, a few candies, and a folded obituary notice from Margie's funeral. "Any reason you're traveling with this?" he asked, holding the paper like it was suspicious. "That's a friend's funeral. I'm going to help her daughter pack up her home." She passed last month. He didn't respond. Just handed it back, still unsmiling. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice. You sure you don't have anything hidden under that jacket, ma'am? Evelyn's back stiffened. Excuse me. I need you to come with me to the investigation room. The female officer looked uncertain. Evelyn noticed it. But she followed anyway. She wasn't going to make a scene. Not here, not with so many eyes. She adjusted her jacket, picked up her phone, and texted quickly, Tommy, they pulled me aside. Going to investigation room. Cop don't like me. Feels wrong. She hit send as the door closed behind her. Inside, the investigation room was small. No windows. Just bright lights and a desk. Officer Locke stood tall. Take off the jacket, he ordered. Sir, I don't understand what this is about. You fit a profile. Could be trafficking. Evelyn's breath caught. I'm a 74-year-old widow. I raised 3 children. My son is. Take off the jacket, he repeated. She slowly unzipped and removed it. Beneath it, she wore a long, modest cardigan over her blouse. Nothing suspicious. That too. She stepped back. That's inappropriate. He stepped closer. I said remove it. The female officer spoke for the first time. Sir, maybe we should do it, he barked. She's hiding something. Evelyn's hands trembled. Her voice cracked. This isn't right. Locke looked at the female officer. Help her. I said help her. The female officer hesitated. Her face conflicted. Suddenly, 3 loud knocks thundered at the door. Boom, boom. Officer. Locke froze. Who is it? The door burst open. With force. And stepped a uniformed team, camouflage fatigues, serious faces, and rifles slung on their backs. Behind them, in full ceremonial dress, stood General Thomas Carter. His eyes swept the room, then locked on the man beside his mother. Get away from her. Evelyn's knees buckled with relief. Her son rushed forward, catching her just in time. The female officer stepped back, stunned. General Carter's voice was ice and fire. This woman is my mother. You will be removed. You will be charged. You will be dismissed. Officer Locke opened his mouth to protest, but words failed. He had no idea who he'd been dealing with. And now the weight of his mistake was descending on him like 1,000 bricks. Carter turned to his team. Escort this man out of the airport. He is under arrest. 2 soldiers stepped forward, grabbing Locke by the arms. For the first time, the officer's face showed fear. Carter turned to the female officer. You report to the lobby and wait for debrief. She nodded, visibly shaken. Evelyn stood in the middle of the room, still holding her son's hand. The fire in her chest hadn't dimmed, but now it was joined by the light of justice. For the first time that morning, she smiled. Chapter 2. The last hug at home 2 days earlier. The morning sun in Montgomery was soft that day, filtered through the thin lace curtains of Evelyn Carter's kitchen. It was one of those rare southern mornings, cool, peaceful, the kind that made you want to sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and forget the world had changed so much. Evelyn sat at the edge of the dining table, folding the last of her clothes into her suitcase. Her home was small but well-loved, full of old photographs, worn furniture, and memories stacked in every corner. Her late husband's Air Force picture hung over the fireplace, frozen in his youthful pride. The home still smelled faintly of lemon polish and lavender sachets, a scent she clung to because it reminded her of simpler, safer times. Thomas, her son, had called her the night before. You sure you're okay flying alone, Mama? He'd asked, his voice soft with concern. I've lived through Jim Crow, 2 wars, and 3 babies. I think I can handle a little turbulence, she'd replied with a smile in her voice. I know you can, he said. But I still worry. This world's not always kind to women like you. You mean old women or black women? Both, she'd paused. I know, baby, but I have to go. Margie was more than a friend. She was my sister in everything but blood. I understand, he said, then added after a beat. I've already arranged the car service. He'll be there 7:30 sharp. Evelyn smiled. Her son always had been like that. Structured, responsible. Ever since he was 12, organizing toy soldiers on the floor like battalions. But she'd never imagined he'd rise to the top like he did, Chief of Army Staff. A title that sounded impressive on paper. But to her, he was still that skinny boy who once tied her shoes before school, when her hands ached too much. Now, as she zipped her suitcase, she heard the familiar tap of footsteps down the stairs. Thomas had stayed the night. He'd made sure of it. He stepped into the kitchen in a t-shirt and sweatpants, holding 2 mugs of hot coffee. He handed her one. "Cream and sugar," he said. "Just like you like it." She smiled and took a sip. "You didn't burn it this time. I bought it from the bakery on 5th. "Cheater," she said, chuckling. They sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee, letting time stretch. The television hummed in the living room, muted, with early news scrolling headlines about a pending weather front in California and the usual political rumbles in D.C. "Do you remember when you were in 8th grade and came home crying 'cause someone told you you'd never make it out of this town?" she asked. He nodded. "Mr. Hawthorne, math teacher, said the military was a last resort. Well, now look at you. Built a career, served your country. Still come home to drink your mama's coffee." Thomas laughed. "Yeah, well, they never really believed in us, did they? No, baby. But that's why we believe in ourselves and each other." The room fell quiet again. But this time, it was heavier. Like something unsaid lingered just beneath the surface. He cleared his throat. "You remember to pack your medication?" She tapped her purse. "Right here, morning and evening pills. And my vitamin D. You've got your ID, phone charger. Travel-sized lotions, snacks?" "I'm not a child, Tommy." "I know, I just—" She reached across the table and touched his hand. "You're a good son." He squeezed her fingers. "You're a better mother." Just then, the sound of wheels crunching gravel signaled the driver's arrival. Thomas stood up and walked her to the door. The sun had risen higher now, casting long rays across the driveway. The air was warming fast. The driver, Kyle, stepped out of the black sedan and nodded politely. Evelyn turned and looked up at her son. He was taller than his father had been, broad-shouldered, handsome, even with the few gray hairs that had started to claim his temples. But in that moment, he just looked like her boy. "Don't go getting in trouble at the airport, Mama," he said, trying to smile but failing to mask his worry. She leaned in and kissed his cheek. "I'm a Southern church lady, not a gang leader. I'll be fine. You call me when you land." "I will. You text me if anything seems wrong. Promise." They embraced tightly, like neither of them wanted to let go. A few moments passed. Evelyn finally pulled back, wiped a tear from the corner of her eye, and said, "Go inside before you make me cry in front of that nice driver." Thomas hesitated, but nodded. "Okay, safe flight, Mama. I love you. I love you more." She stepped into the car and gave one final wave from the window. As the sedan pulled away, Thomas stood in the driveway, his hands on his hips, watching until the car disappeared down the road. Inside the car, Evelyn sat back against the seat, her fingers gently touching her phone. Something about the morning felt strange, like a cloud no one else could see. But she pushed the thought aside. She was a woman who'd endured much, and she wasn't about to let a little unease ruin her journey. She didn't know that in 48 hours, she would be standing in a sterile investigation room under fluorescent lights, her dignity on the line. But she had something stronger than fear. She had her son's love. And she had truth on her side. That, she believed, would be enough. Chapter 3. Eyes on the terminal. The airport was already buzzing when Evelyn Carter stepped through the automated glass doors. The chill of the air conditioning met her skin like a quiet warning, unnatural, too crisp, too clinical. A sharp contrast to the warm embrace of her Alabama morning. Travelers bustled through the terminal, dragging carry-ons, sipping lattes, checking departure boards. Parents soothed crying toddlers. Businessmen murmured into Bluetooth headsets. A couple posed for a selfie under a sign that read, "Welcome to Montgomery International Airport, your gateway to the world." Evelyn moved deliberately. She walked with grace, not hurried, not hesitant, just steady. One hand clutched the strap of her modest black purse, the other guided her wheeled suitcase. She wore a neatly pressed cardigan over a floral blouse, and comfortable navy slacks. She didn't look suspicious. She looked like a grandmother on her way to visit family, but that didn't stop him from noticing her. From his post near the TSA checkpoint, Officer Raymond Locke's eyes darted from one passenger to the next with a predator's precision. A former military man turned TSA enforcement officer, Locke saw the world through a lens of suspicion and bias. Where most saw travelers, he saw threats. Where most saw diversity, he saw danger. And today, his eyes locked onto Evelyn Carter. There she was alone, elderly, black, composed. Something about that confidence rubbed him the wrong way. He hated confident black women. To him, they weren't supposed to walk with pride. They were supposed to shrink, apologize, know their place. His lip curled as he watched her. Something about her calmness angered him. It was the same kind of calm his own mother used to have before she walked out when he was just a kid. A woman who never looked back. A woman who didn't let anyone control her, and here was Evelyn Carter walking like she didn't have to answer to anyone. He hated that dot nearby. Another officer, Maria Torres, monitored the security line. She was younger, just a few years out. Of the academy, Latina, and always nervous around Locke. His temper was no secret. Neither was his contempt for anyone who didn't fit his mold of American. But she followed the rules. Locke bent them. Evelyn approached the check-in kiosk. She tapped the screen slowly, verifying her flight details. She had already checked in online with help from Thomas the night before, but she still liked to print her boarding pass, just in case. When she turned toward the security checkpoint, she spotted the line's long, winding ropes of weary travelers. Her flight was in just under 2 hours. She had plenty of time. She moved through the line quietly. No fuss, no complaints. She offered a gentle smile to the man ahead of her in line when his baby dropped a pacifier. He nodded in thanks. Finally, it was her turn. She placed her tray on the conveyor belt. Her shoes, purse, cardigan, and carry-on bag all went into the scanner. She stepped through the body scanner, standing still with her arms raised slightly. The scanner beeped once faintly. The attending officer looked at the screen. "Ma'am, we're just going to do a quick pat down on your right hip. Looks like a metal pin in your slacks." Evelyn nodded. "It's my artificial hip. Had it replaced in 2015. No problem." The officer patted gently. "Nothing suspicious." He waved her through, but Officer Locke was already on the move. He approached from the side, staring intently at her as she gathered her things. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can you step aside for a moment?" He said in a tone that didn't ask, it demanded. Evelyn looked up, confused but calm. "Is something wrong, officer? Just a random security protocol." "Step over here, please." Maria Torres glanced over. Startled. "Ray, she already cleared the scanner." Locke gave her a sharp look that shut her up instantly. Evelyn hesitated. "I don't understand." "You don't have to understand, ma'am," Locke snapped. "You just have to cooperate." Evelyn's eyes didn't flinch. She stood taller. "I am cooperating. I passed your security check. I'm cleared." Locke stepped closer, his frame looming. "Unless you'd prefer I call for a full inspection right here in front of everyone, I suggest you come quietly." "Torres." shifted nervously. Evelyn knew better than to cause a scene. The whispers would start. The phones would come out. She had no interest in becoming a viral video for all the wrong reasons. Very well, she said softly, lifting her purse. Locke motioned toward a side corridor. This way. They passed through a heavy door marked Security, Authorized Personnel Only. The hallway was narrow, sterile. The click of Evelyn's soft-soled shoes echoed in the silence. At the end of the hallway stood the small investigation room, no bigger than a dentist's office. White walls, one table, two chairs, a security camera in the corner. Evelyn stepped inside. Maria followed, clutching a clipboard and glancing awkwardly between Evelyn and Locke. Is this really necessary? Evelyn asked calmly, but firmly. We have reason to believe you may be transporting undeclared items, Locke said without looking her in the eye. That's a lie. Locke finally looked up. Excuse me? I said that's a lie, she repeated. You don't suspect me of anything. You just don't like how I look. Maria flinched. The room fell dead silent. Locke's face twitched. Remove your jacket. Evelyn slowly unzipped her cardigan and laid it on the table. Now the blouse. No. Locke took a step forward. Ma'am, do not resist. I said no. Maria spoke up. Ray, we don't have probable cause. This isn't protocol. I'm in charge here, Locke barked. Before he could say another word, Evelyn reached into her purse, pressed her phone screen, and sent a quick voice message. Her hand trembled as she whispered, Tommy, they pulled me. Security room. I'm scared. He's not right. She sent it. Locke lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. Give me the phone. But before he could snatch it, 3 loud knocks shook the door. Boom. Boom. Maria's eyes went wide. Locke froze. Who? The door opened. 4 men in army fatigue stepped inside, stone-faced. Behind them, standing tall and furious, was General Thomas Carter. Evelyn gasped, her knees going weak. Mom, Thomas said, rushing forward. I got your message. Locke stumbled back. Wait, I didn't. Who is this? Thomas's voice was fire and steel. I'm her son. General Carter, United States Army, and you're done. Chapter 4. The officer's stare. The room felt smaller now, not physically but in energy. The once confident sneer on Officer Locke's face collapsed under the weight of something far heavier than rank. It was the presence of authority. Real authority. Not a badge on a chest, but earned through sacrifice, discipline, and character. General Thomas Carter stepped inside the investigation room like a thunderstorm with legs. His army dress uniform gleamed under the fluorescent lights, 4 stars. On his shoulders, polished shoes, ribbons that spoke of decades of service, and a nameplate that carried weight even in rooms filled with power. He didn't bark orders. He didn't need to. He just stood still and looked. Locke shifted uncomfortably, suddenly unsure of what to do with his hands. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Evelyn clutched her son's forearm for balance. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her eyes, filled with years of quiet dignity, now shimmered with emotion, not from fear anymore, but from overwhelming relief. Thomas looked down at her, gently placing his other hand over hers. I got here as fast as I could, he whispered. Then, his eyes lifted, cold, calculating. They found Officer Locke. You, Thomas said. His voice didn't rise, yet it filled the room like a courtroom gavel. Step away from my mother. Locke took a step back. His composure cracked. He fumbled for something, anything to say. She triggered a scanner alert, he muttered. Standard procedure. She resisted. I had reason to suspect. You had no reason, Thomas cut in. Sir, with all due respect. There is no respect left here, Thomas snapped. And you will not sir me to dodge accountability. Locke's throat bobbed. She matched a suspicious profile. And what profile was that? Thomas stepped forward. Black, female, 74, with a Bible and arthritis cream in her purse? Or was it just your sickness choosing its next victim? Silence fell, thick, heavy, shameful. Maria Torres, standing near the wall, looked like she wanted to disappear. She hadn't said a word since the general entered, but her face said enough. She hadn't agreed with any of this. And now her conscience trembled under the spotlight. Thomas turned to her. "What's your name, officer?" "Maria Torres," she said, barely above a whisper. "Officer Torres," Thomas said evenly. "I want you to record this, every word, every action. This is now a formal investigation under federal scrutiny. You'll write your statement under oath, and it will go directly to my legal team and the Department of Homeland Security." She nodded quickly. Locke's voice raised again, this time with desperation. "I followed protocol. She was uncooperative. Look, check the logs." "I was doing my job." "You weren't doing a job," Thomas said, turning slowly. "You were abusing your power. Intimidating a civilian, an elderly woman, my mother." He stepped forward until he was toe-to-toe with the officer. "Tell me something, Officer Locke. Did it feel good? Watching her struggle with her dignity in this room. Was it about duty? Or was it about control?" Locke's lips tightened. "This isn't the place for speeches." Thomas smiled coldly. "Then I'll make it short." He turned to the soldier standing just outside the doorway. "Remove his badge. Disarm him. Escort him to federal holding for investigation under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and Civilian Oversight." Two soldiers stepped in without hesitation. "Wait, what? You can't do that," Locke barked. "This is TSA jurisdiction. You're military. You have no authority here." Thomas didn't even blink. "Actually, I do. You see, interfering with a protected federal civilian under false pretenses, intimidation under color of law, and attempted coercion of a senior citizen is a federal crime. One of my men recorded your actions from the moment she was detained." Locke looked toward the door. Standing behind the soldiers was a clean-cut Army legal officer in civilian attire, holding a black case in his hands, recording device already displayed. "We knew who you were, Officer Locke," Thomas continued. "You've had 3 complaints buried by bureaucracy in the past. 1 woman was silenced, 1 family dropped the case, and 1 file was mysteriously erased, but not this time." The soldiers took Locke's arms. He didn't resist, but the color drained from his face. As they dragged him out, Evelyn turned her head. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply said, "You need help, son. Not a badge." That sentence hung in the air like scripture. Locke was gone. The room seemed to exhale. Thomas turned to his mother and reached into his coat. He pulled out a small handkerchief and gently dabbed her cheek where a tear had slipped. "Come on, Mama," he said softly. "Let's get out of here." Evelyn nodded, leaning on him slightly. As they walked out, Maria followed behind, eyes wide, processing the collapse of the authority she once feared. Out in the hallway, reporters had already gathered. Word had spread fast. A few shouted questions. Others filmed as General Carter shielded his mother and walked past them, unbothered. His face was carved in stone, but inside him, fury still simmered, not just for what had happened, but for every other mother who didn't have a son in uniform to defend her. This wasn't just about Evelyn anymore. It was about a system, and it had just been cracked wide open. Chapter 5. A quiet whisper of hate 2 weeks earlier. The buzz of fluorescent lights filled the dim, windowless office where Officer Raymond Locke sat hunched over a faded desk. The walls were blank save for a clock that ticked too loudly and a wall-mounted bulletin board that hadn't been updated since spring. Locke didn't notice any of that. His focus was elsewhere, on the security monitor replaying body cam footage from a previous screening. A young black man in a hoodie had refused to remove his necklace before going through the scanner. Locke had written it up as non-compliance with federal directives. What the camera didn't show was the smirk on Locke's face just after. The man was handcuffed and removed for further questioning. He'd claimed it was about procedure, about safety. But it wasn't. Not really. Locke leaned back in his chair and cracked his knuckles, eyes still fixed on the screen like he was watching a movie he'd seen 100 times and still enjoyed. There was a knock at the door. "Ray," came a voice. It was Charles Brenner, his supervisor. Mid-50s, balding, always reeking of stale coffee. "Got that file on the Miller complaint?" Locke reached over to a pile of folders on his desk and tossed one toward him without turning around. "Tell." "Legal, it's another misunderstanding. We had cause." Brenner caught the file with one hand and hesitated. "We've had 5 misunderstandings this quarter. 3 are yours." Locke finally turned, his expression flat. "So?" Brenner looked at him, uncertain whether to press further. Then he sighed. "Just be careful, Ray. Always am." But that wasn't true. Not anymore. Raymond Locke wasn't always like this. 15 years ago, he was a young soldier returning from Iraq with a Bronze Star and a shattered knee. His service had once meant something to himself, to his country, but the years that followed had been less kind. The VA visits, the slow desk jobs, the endless bureaucracy. He felt forgotten, replaced, overlooked. And somewhere along the line, bitterness turned into something darker. He began seeing the world not through values but through resentment. It started small. A grudge here, a sarcastic comment there. But it festered. He blamed others for what he'd lost. The ones who got promoted. The ones who were given grace. The ones who didn't have to work twice as hard. In his mind, they were stealing what should have been his. The others had a color, a sound, a swagger he despised. He told himself he wasn't racist. He'd served next to black soldiers, had barbecues with them, trained with them. But in quiet corners of his heart, he believed the worst. Every time he saw someone who reminded him of the system that ignored him, he reached for control, power, punishment. It wasn't about safety. It was about humiliation. He didn't want to protect America. He wanted to remind it that he still mattered, that he could still command fear. Back at his apartment, Locke's living room told the story his uniform never could. Stained carpet, a couch that sagged in the middle, an American flag hanging crooked over the fireplace, a bottle of whiskey half drained beside his armchair, a stack of unpaid bills on the counter. He lived alone, had no family, no friends who called. Only a few old Army buddies who stopped checking in after he blew up at them during a 4th of July gathering the year before. His TV played conservative news on a loop. His social media was a dark tunnel of conspiracies, racial resentment, and comment sections where he could spew his venom anonymously. He posted under usernames like True American 1776 and No Apologies Vet. And on one particular comment thread, a user had written something that stuck with him. If they want respect, they should earn it like the rest of us. He read it 3 times. Not a dot. That thought became a mantra. Then a mission. So when he saw Evelyn Carter in the terminal that day, walking proud, unafraid, untouched by the weight he carried, he didn't just see a traveler. He saw a challenge. An affront to the fantasy of superiority he clung to. He saw someone who didn't need his permission to belong, and it enraged him. The stare he gave her in the terminal was no accident. It was a warning, a signal, a threat. The same one he'd given countless others, only this time he picked the wrong target. He didn't know she had a son in uniform. Didn't know she was protected by a wall of love, service, and truth that he could never breach. To him, she was just another name to humiliate. Another reason to feel big. But the truth was, Raymond Locke wasn't big. He was shrinking. Every day. And the quiet whisper of hate he once nursed in secret, it had become a scream. Chapter 6. Pulled aside. The airport felt colder now. Not in temperature, but in spirit. Evelyn Carter stood in the corridor just outside the investigation room, her purse clutched to her chest like armor. The door had closed behind her son, and the officers escorting Locke out. The silence that followed was not peaceful, it was loaded. Heavy, waiting. Maria Torres remained inside, standing awkwardly near the door, still holding the clipboard she hadn't written a single word on. Her knuckles were white against the wood, as if she were bracing herself for what came next. Evelyn, meanwhile, had taken a seat on the long metal bench just outside. She sat upright, her posture a pillar of dignity even in the wake of trauma. She had always taught her children this: they may try to break your body, but don't ever let them break your name. Now, for the first time in years, her body had felt small. Her name almost crushed. Almost. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her purse and took out her phone. Dozens of missed calls and texts buzzed across the screen. From Tommy. Mama. Are you all right? Don't move, I'm here. We're handling it. You did nothing wrong. She sighed and leaned her head back against the cold wall. Her eyes fluttered shut, just for a moment. Just enough to breathe. Flashbacks played behind her eyelids. The moment Locke's voice first barked at her. The way he grabbed her wrist. The look in his eyes, not suspicion, but something darker. Hatred. It wasn't about rules or scanners or national security. It was personal. She had seen that kind of look before, decades ago, in Mississippi, on buses, in courtrooms, outside churches, burned to the ground. And here it was again, this time in an airport, in 22-5. Evelyn opened her eyes. Her jaw tightened. Her spine straightened. She would not let this moment define her. Just then, the investigation room door creaked open. Maria Torres stepped out hesitantly. "Ma'am," she said softly. I want to apologize." Evelyn looked up. "For what you did," Maria hesitated. "For what I didn't do." The hallway was still. Evelyn didn't respond right away. She studied the young officer's face, ashamed, red-eyed, but honest. Maria sat beside her on the bench. "I knew it was wrong," she whispered, "from the moment he pulled you aside. I knew it wasn't about safety. Then why didn't you stop it?" Evelyn asked, not unkindly, but not softly either. Maria looked down at her hands. "Because he outranked me. Because I was afraid. Because I've only been here 13 months, and I've seen what happens to people who speak up." She exhaled hard. "I told myself I was following protocol. But the truth is, I failed you. I failed what this badge is supposed to mean." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something Maria didn't expect. "You're young. You still have time to make this badge mean something again." Maria's eyes welled up. She nodded. Just then, General Carter returned. He was no longer flanked by his security team. Now it was just him, a son, not a general. His face was composed, but Evelyn could see it in his eyes. Rage, grief, and a deep, almost unbearable shame that his mother had gone through this. "Mama," he said quietly, kneeling beside her. "We're going home. I've made arrangements." "I still have a flight to catch," she replied, surprising both him and Maria. Thomas blinked. "You don't have to. I can fly you there in a private jet. I can have someone go in your place." "Say the word." "No," Evelyn said firmly. "I started this journey for a reason, to honor a friend. To say goodbye. I won't let him stop me from doing what I came to do." Thomas looked at her with a mixture of awe and concern. "You're something else, Mama." Evelyn smiled gently. "I raised you, didn't I?" He chuckled despite himself. Behind them, a Homeland Security investigator approached. Suit, badge, tablet in hand. "General Carter, Mrs. Carter, everything has been formally documented. Officer Locke is in custody. There will be a public investigation. We've also contacted your airline. You'll be rebooked with priority. Status and security will escort you through the terminal personally. I don't need a red carpet." Evelyn replied, standing. Just fairness. That's all. The agent nodded, clearly moved. Thomas wrapped an arm around her shoulder. You sure you want to go through with this flight? Evelyn reached for her suitcase and held the handle tight. The best way to stand tall is to keep walking. And so she did. Outside the investigation corridor, people began to notice her as she passed. Some recognized her from the news alert that had already spread across social media. Elderly woman detained unjustly. General's mother harassed. By TSA, the headline read. Photos from airport phones had already gone viral, but Evelyn didn't hide. She walked through that terminal with grace. Not for attention. Not for sympathy. She walked for every other mother who had ever been pulled aside and silenced. For every woman who didn't get the knock on the door in time. For every traveler treated like a suspect simply for existing. And when she reached her gate, she sat quietly, folded her hands in her lap, and waited for the next chapter of her journey. Not just the flight, but justice. Chapter 7. The humiliation begins 10 minutes before the knock. Evelyn stood in the center of the small investigation room, her hands clasped gently in front of her, body still, eyes unflinching. She didn't tremble, not visibly. But inside, something was breaking quietly, privately, like a window cracking under pressure without making a sound. Officer Raymond Locke stood on the other side of the room, arms crossed, glaring at her like she was an enemy combatant instead of a 74-year-old woman who had never broken a single law in her life. Maria Torres stood to the side, her clipboard untouched, her eyes lowered. She hadn't said a word since they entered the room. Remove the cardigan, Locke said again. I already did. Evelyn replied calmly, her voice steady. I mean the blouse beneath it. She stared at him. No, you're refusing an official order? I'm refusing an unjust one. Locke's jaw tightened. His fingers flexed at his sides like he was itching to assert himself. He stepped forward. You think because you're someone's mama, you get special treatment? This is federal security protocol. If you've got nothing to hide, prove it. She didn't move, I said. He barked. Take it. Off. Evelyn took a breath, slow and full, like she was inhaling every moment of degradation and letting it fill her lungs, not to surrender, but to hold it. Carry it. Own it. You will not strip me of my dignity, she said softly. That made Locke flinch, because those words, not strip me of my dignity, cut through everything he understood about control. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't afraid the way he expected, and that scared him more than anything. But instead of backing down, he reached for the radio clipped to his belt. Officer Torres, assist with the search. Maria looked up, startled. What? She won't comply. Standard female protocol, assist with the clothing search. I don't think we have authority for that, Maria stammered. She cleared the scanner. There's no alert, no probable cause. I gave the order, Locke snapped. Are you disobeying a direct command? Maria froze, caught between morality and hierarchy. Her eyes met Evelyn's for the first time, really met them. And what she saw wasn't fear or weakness, it was strength. A quiet, unshakable strength. Like a mountain that refused to move, no matter how loud the wind howled. I'm not assisting. With this, Maria finally said, her voice low. Locke's nostrils flared. Fine, he muttered. Step outside. You're no good to me in here anyway. Maria hesitated, then slowly backed out of the room. Evelyn and Locke were now alone. The air changed. You know, Locke said, his voice dropping to something darker, almost a growl. People like you have been getting away with a lot lately. Playing the victim, playing the race card. Thinking the world owes you something. Evelyn didn't respond. She just watched him. Like you watch a dangerous animal, you don't panic. You don't provoke. You want me to believe you're just some sweet church lady flying to California? He scoffed. You think I don't see through that? She didn't blink. "I think you see only what you want to see." That made him step closer, but Evelyn stood her ground. "You think being a little old lady protects you?" he sneered. "It doesn't. Not here. Not with me." It was at that moment that Evelyn realized something important. He wasn't interested in finding something. He was interested in breaking something. Not her suitcase. Not her clothes. Her spirit. But what he didn't understand, what he couldn't possibly understand, was that she had been forged in fire decades before he was even born. She had marched in Selma, held her babies through nights of gunfire in the old neighborhood, survived years when her husband was deployed and the paycheck barely stretched across the table. She had seen men like him before, swaggering, small, dangerous, only because of the systems that let them believe they were tall. And just as Locke opened his mouth to speak again, 3 loud knocks exploded at the door. Boom. Boom. Locke froze. Like time stopped. "Who is it?" he barked. But before he could step back, the door burst open. And the room, so small, so sharp, so suffocating, was suddenly filled with something bigger than hate. Justice. Evelyn single quotes, as eyes flooded with tears. But not from fear. Her son had come. In the chaos that followed Locke's arrest, the investigators arriving, Maria returning to the room, no one fully understood what had been building inside Evelyn. Because while the cameras caught the reunion and reporters chased the sound bites, no one could see the part that mattered most, the invisible line that had been crossed, and the unshakable vow Evelyn made in her heart. This will not be buried, not like the others. Not this time. Chapter 8. A Mother's Quiet Resolve. The wheels of the plane lifted off the runway with a deep mechanical hum, rising into the sky like a whisper finally heard. Evelyn Carter sat in seat 3A by the window, staring out at the clouds forming a soft, endless blanket beneath her. It should have been just another flight. Just another day. But nothing felt normal anymore. She'd refused the complimentary champagne. The airline had offered her first-class rebooking, courtesy of the PR panic management team. They meant well. But no glass of wine or comfortable seat could undo what had happened in that small white room an hour earlier. And Evelyn wasn't interested in comfort. She was interested in truth. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, worn at the corners, and clicked her pen open. It was a habit she'd had for years. Whenever the world pressed too hard against her chest, she wrote it out. Not always for others, often just for herself. But today felt different. At the top of the fresh page, she wrote, July 9th, somewhere over Mississippi. A room with no dignity. Her pen moved slowly. They didn't want answers. They wanted surrender. They didn't ask me questions. They made me a suspect because I existed in a body they didn't trust. They didn't see my age, my service, my silence, only my skin, only my refusal to cower. She paused, eyes burning. But I didn't give them what they wanted. And I never will. Across the aisle, a young white woman glanced over. She looked nervous, like she recognized Evelyn but didn't know what to say. Her eyes flickered between sympathy and discomfort. Evelyn offered a polite nod. The woman gave a sheepish smile and looked away. Evelyn didn't blame her. Not everyone had the tools to know what to do when truth stared them in the face. She turned her gaze back to the window. The clouds rolled by, endless and soft and silent. Her thoughts drifted to her son. She'd raised Thomas to lead with honor, to speak up when something wasn't right, to use his rank not as a shield, but as a light. And he had done just that. His knock on that door had saved her, not just from Locke's authority, but from invisibility. How many mothers didn't get a knock in time? That question pulsed like a heartbeat. She thought of names she'd read in headlines. Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor. So many others whose stories ended in rooms like the one she'd just survived. But mine won't, she vowed quietly. Mine will. Begin there. She closed the notebook gently. Suddenly, her phone buzzed on the tray table beside her. A message from Thomas. Tommy, they've already started a full investigation. DHS is taking it seriously. I'm making sure it doesn't get buried, she replied. Mama, good, but I want to do more. I want to speak. A moment later, Tommy, speak how? She thought a moment before typing her reply. Mama, not just to them, to everyone. I want my voice on record. So this doesn't happen again to anyone's mother. He didn't respond right away, then. Finally, Tommy, then let's make sure they hear you. Evelyn smiled faintly and looked out the window again. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't an activist. But she was something more enduring. A mother, and a mother with a voice in the story could change things, especially when she'd been silent too long. As the plane cut through the clouds toward California, Evelyn knew her trip wasn't just about mourning a friend anymore. It was about rising, reclaiming her place, protecting others. This wasn't the end of her journey. It was the beginning. Chapter 9. News breaks the silence 3 days later, Washington, D.C. The story broke just after 6 a.m. Eastern Time. First as a quiet blip on local news websites. Elderly woman detained without cause at Montgomery Airport. Then came the keywords that made it explode: racial profiling, TSA misconduct, Army general's mother. Within hours, it had gone national. Cable news anchors sat up straighter in their chairs. Editors pushed aside international headlines. Producers scrambled for clips of the video. Grainy cell phone footage showing Evelyn Carter being escorted by TSA, her son arriving in uniform, her soft words overheard by a camera boom. You need help, son. Not a badge. The line became a headline. Then a hashtag. Her name is Evelyn. The country woke up to the face of a proud black mother, eyes wise with pain, posture still regal despite humiliation. It wasn't just the injustice, it was her dignity. Through it that struck a nerve. People remembered her, and they shared her story. In a small church in Georgia, Reverend Lisa Harmon scrolled through the video at her desk, her morning sermon notes forgotten. She watched Evelyn's calm, her refusal to be broken, the way her son stood behind her like a wall of justice. Tears pricked Lisa's eyes. She whispered, Lord, give more of us that kind of strength. She paused her scrolling and typed out a message to her congregation's email list. This Sunday, we will not preach on fear, we will preach on endurance. We will speak Evelyn's name. At a university campus in Chicago, sophomore political science major Kayla Mitchell sat cross-legged in the library cafe, headphones in, watching the clip for the 5th time. She hit pause, scrolled back, and screen captured Evelyn's quote. Then opened Canva. She created a graphic. Evelyn's face on one side, the quote on the other. She posted it on Twitter. This is who we fight for. Not for hashtags, but for humanity. Hashtag her name is Evelyn. Within hours, it had 80,000 shares. Inside a Fox News editorial meeting. Not everyone was moved. Behind closed doors, executives debated how to spin the narrative. Let's not lean too hard into the racial angle, one producer suggested. We highlight the breakdown in procedure. Make it about TSA training. Bad apples, not bad systems. Another muttered, the general's involvement makes it tricky. Looks like the system corrected itself. A third leaned back and said, but you can't deny the optics. A 70-year-old black woman strip-searched? On U.S. soil? That's not just a story. That's a symbol. They agreed, whatever side they took, people would care. Back in California, Evelyn's hotel room, Evelyn sat on the edge of the hotel bed, watching the news unfold on the flat-screen TV. Her image was everywhere now. Not just the footage, but talk panels, commentaries, protest signs. She'd spent the last 2 days in private. The memorial she came for had been beautiful, quiet, a celebration of her late friend's life. But there was no peace for Evelyn yet. Thomas sat near the window, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes," he said into the receiver. "She's here, she's safe. And no, she's not ready to speak to the media, not yet." He hung up. "They want a statement," he told her gently. Evelyn looked up from the TV. "What would I say?" He paused. "Whatever's on your heart, Mama. Doesn't have to be political. Doesn't have to be polished. Just honest." She nodded slowly. "I'll pray on it," she said. "But if I speak, it's not to go viral. It's to stop it from happening again." Meanwhile, Montgomery Airport, Alabama, the TSA office was flooded with reporters and investigators. Maria Torres sat nervously in a private interview room. A government official seated across from her, voice recorder on. "State your name and position." "Maria Elena Torres, TSA Enforcement Officer, 13 months on duty." "What did you witness on July 7th during the detainment of Evelyn Carter?" She swallowed hard, and then slowly she began to speak. "Everything. The protocol violations." The look in Officer Locke's eyes. The moment she wanted to intervene and didn't. The shame. She finished with a quiet whisper. "We failed her." The official clicked the recorder off. "You did the right thing today, Officer Torres." Maria didn't respond. "Not yet." "But—" Her hands stopped trembling. Outside the Justice Building in Sacramento, California, a group of protesters gathered, holding handmade signs. "We see you, Evelyn. Justice doesn't age. Respect black women at all ages." The media captured it. The public heard it. The ripple had become a wave. That evening, Evelyn's first statement. She sat at the small writing desk in the hotel room, phone camera propped on a suitcase. Her son helped her frame the shot. Just her face. No glamour. No filter. She spoke quietly. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm a mother, a retired schoolteacher, and a proud American. 3 days ago, I was pulled into a small room at an airport and treated like a threat because of the color of my skin and the age of my bones. I was humiliated. But I was not broken. I survived it because my son came for me. But too many mothers don't get that knock on the door. So I'm speaking now, not just for myself. I'm speaking for the ones who couldn't." She looked into the lens. Dignity is not given by uniforms or badges. It is given by how we treat one another. And it's time we start protecting that dignity everywhere. She reached forward and ended the recording. Thomas stood silent. "You want to post it now?" he asked. "No," she said. "I want to sit with it one night. Let it breathe." He nodded. But the message had already been spoken, and the world was waiting. Chapter 10. The Fire and the Flood. 5 days later, Washington, D.C. It started with a knock on the hotel door. Thomas opened it to reveal a sharply dressed woman in a navy blue pantsuit, her government badge gleaming against her jacket. She spoke quickly, professionally, but with unexpected warmth. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Camille Foster, congressional aide to Senator Richardson. The senator would like to formally invite you to testify before the Homeland Security Oversight Committee." Evelyn blinked. "Testify?" she repeated. Camille nodded. "Yes, ma'am. The committee is holding an emergency hearing on TSA accountability, racial profiling, and systemic abuse of authority. Your story has become the centerpiece of a national conversation. They want you to speak directly." Evelyn looked at her. Son. Thomas didn't pressure her. He just asked gently, "Do you want to?" Evelyn answered the way she had when he was 10 years old and had asked her why she marched in the streets back in 1965. "If I don't, who will?" That week, across America, the country had ignited. News networks were running segments titled "Justice for Evelyn," the system on trial, and how one mother changed the conversation. Civil rights leaders referenced her in speeches. Pundits debated her story with breathless passion. Some defended her. Others questioned her. Social media was ablaze. At Maya Speaks. It took a uniformed son to stop a uniformed threat. That says everything. Hashtag her name is Evelyn at FireCop89. If the system only works when generals show up, it's not a system. It's a performance. At Truth Patriot USA, TSA was just doing their job. These victim stories are out of control. Y'all forget 9/11s too fast. But despite the noise, the heart of the matter remained steady. An elderly black woman had nearly been stripped, shamed, and silenced. And the country saw it happen. Now, they wanted to know what came next. Day of the hearing, Capitol Hill. The marble steps of the Capitol glistened under the late morning sun. Evelyn wore a deep plum suit and a string of pearls, her hair pulled back in soft curls. She walked slowly, but with quiet command, each step echoing through the plaza like memory itself. Crowds gathered behind barricades, holding signs. Dignity has nitrogen monoxide age. We stand with Mama Evelyn. Security is not humiliation. Inside the hearing room, press cameras buzzed, capturing every detail. Senators took their places along the long semicircle of microphones and nameplates. The chairwoman, Senator Lillian Richardson, tapped her gavel. This hearing will come to order. Thomas stood beside his mother as she was sworn in. His uniform was crisp, his jaw tight. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was thunderous. Evelyn took her seat at the witness table. The room quieted. She adjusted the microphone and spoke with a calm that felt centuries old. Madam Chairwoman, Honorable Senators, my name is Evelyn Carter. I am 74 years old. I am a mother, a widow, a retired schoolteacher, and an American citizen. On the morning of July 7th, I was detained without probable cause at Montgomery Airport. I was pulled into a room. I was accused, interrogated, and ordered to undress. Not because I posed a threat, but because I didn't look like someone they trusted. Gasps rippled quietly through the room. Evelyn continued, I want you to understand something. I am not angry for myself alone. I'm angry for every elderly person who has ever been shamed by someone. Younger with a badge, I'm angry for every black woman who has been told her dignity is disposable. I'm angry for every mother whose son wasn't a general, who didn't get to walk out of that room. She paused, lifting her chin. And I'm asking you, what are you going to do about it? For a moment, no one spoke. Then Senator Richardson leaned forward. Mrs. Carter, what would justice look like to you? Evelyn looked directly at her. Justice isn't one arrest or one apology. It's a system that won't let it happen again. It's training, oversight, accountability, real punishment for abuse of power. Justice is knowing I'm not the last Evelyn to go through that door, but maybe the last one to go through it alone. Her voice trembled slightly, but not from fear. From fire. Later that night, national news clips from the hearing went viral within minutes. Newspapers ran headlines. Evelyn Carter brings Capitol to tears. A mother's testimony shakes. Congress. From airport to hearing room, one woman's fight for dignity. On CNN, Anderson Cooper sat across from Thomas Carter, now publicly speaking for the first time. General Carter, Anderson said, what was it like seeing your mother in that hearing room? Thomas didn't smile. It was like watching Rosa Parks in real time. The flood in the days that followed. New policies were proposed. Mandatory bias training for all federal transport employees. Independent civilian review boards for TSA misconduct. A National Elder Protections Act, specifically targeting rights of senior citizens in federal facilities. Petitions gained millions of signatures. Protests filled airports. A movement bloomed from one woman's silent endurance. But through it all, Evelyn never called herself a hero. She said only this. I was just trying to get to California. But God had other plans for the journey. Chapter 11. The letter 2 weeks after the hearing, Sacramento, California. The morning sun filtered through the gauzy white curtains of Evelyn Carter's home office, casting long golden lines across her writing desk. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of a wall clock and the faint chirp of sparrows outside her window. Evelyn sat in her writing chair, the same chair she'd sat in for years while grading papers, writing birthday cards to grandchildren, and drafting Sunday school devotionals. But today was different. Today, she was writing a letter that had weighed on her heart since the day she testified. She opened her notebook, flipped past pages filled with headlines and notes from interviews, and tore out a clean sheet of paper. With care, she placed it on the desk, pulled out her favorite pen black, fine-tipped, and began. Dear Officer Torres, I hope this letter finds you well and in a place of reflection, not regret. I want to begin with the most important words. Thank you. You may not believe you deserve them. You may still feel the sting of shame or guilt for not doing more in that moment when I stood in the room with your colleague. But let me be clear. You made a choice that many don't. You found your voice before it was too late. You stood up when you could have looked away. That matters. I saw the way you avoided my eyes when I was first detained. I saw the fear on your face, not fear of me, but fear of what standing up might cost you. I've lived long enough to know that silence isn't always cowardice. Sometimes it's conditioning. Sometimes it's survival. But I also saw you choose something else. You stood outside that room, and when the time came, you spoke. You told the truth when it mattered most. And that truth helped shape a national conversation. You don't know how rare that is. Many people stay silent forever. You didn't. You saved others from what I endured. That's no small thing. Evelyn paused, closed her eyes for a moment, and continued writing. I once taught a young girl named Lisa who reminded me of you, soft-spoken, sharp-eyed, always trying to do what was right, even when no one noticed. Years later, she wrote me a letter after becoming a social worker. She said, "You once told me that courage is doing the right thing when the wrong thing feels easier. That never left me. Maria, I say that to you now. You were brave. Even if your voice trembled. I don't know what you've endured since that day. I don't know if your colleagues judged you. I don't know if you've doubted your future in law enforcement. But I do know this. You have a place in the better version of that system. We need people like you, people who see, people who feel, people who refuse to let just following orders become an excuse for injustice. I believe you have more to give this world, maybe not in a uniform forever, maybe as a teacher, a mother, a lawyer, a voice in rooms that silence others. That part is for you to decide, but whatever you choose, carry this moment with you. Let it be your beginning. And when the day comes that you find yourself in a room where someone is powerless and afraid, I hope you remember the sound of my voice. The silence of that room and the knock that changed everything. Be the knock. Maria. With gratitude, Evelyn Carter. She folded the letter slowly, with a reverence reserved for sacred things. Then she slid it into a simple white envelope, hand addressed to the TSA's Internal Personnel Liaison Office in Washington, D.C., where she knew Maria's reassignment had been processed. On the back she wrote, "For Officer Maria Torres, with hope." Then she sealed it, pressed her fingers gently to the flap, and whispered a quiet prayer. Let this land where it needs to. 3 days later, Washington, D.C. Maria sat at her modest new desk, tucked inside a small Federal Training Division office. Her reassignment hadn't been disciplinary. They'd called it transitionary, but she knew better. The gossip, the stares, the cold shoulders from former colleagues had pushed her out. She wasn't sorry she spoke, but some nights, she wasn't sure she had done enough. When the envelope arrived, handwritten, no return address, her fingers trembled as she opened it. As she read, her shoulders shook. Quiet tears welled in her eyes and slid down her cheeks. When she reached the last line, "Be the knock, Maria," her sob escaped into the silent office. She folded the letter and held it to her chest. In that moment, she knew she hadn't failed. She'd been seen, and more than that, she'd been forgiven. Chapter 12. The Apology That Never Came. 3 months later, Montgomery. Alabama. The air in Montgomery had changed since that July morning. The airport now had new signs posted across every checkpoint, titled Traveler Rights and Dignity Policy. The faces behind the counters had changed too, some voluntarily, others not. And the world had moved forward. News cycles spun on. New tragedies, new outrages, new movements took center stage. But for Evelyn Carter, some things lingered. Justice had been served on paper. Officer Raymond Locke had been terminated from federal service and barred from holding any position in law enforcement nationwide. The internal report cited gross misconduct, racial targeting, and abuse of authority under color of law. He hadn't spoken publicly. No apology, no statement, no letter. Just silence. And as the months wore on, Evelyn found that silence louder than any insult he had hurled in that room. Back at home, Sacramento, the sun was setting outside Evelyn's living room window. Warm orange light painted the hardwood floor as she sat in her favorite armchair, a cup of chamomile tea cooling on the side table. The house was quiet. Thomas had flown back to D.C. for work. The grandkids had called earlier, filling her afternoon with laughter. But now she sat with a letter in her hand, not from Locke, but from the Department of Justice. It was a standard update, final confirmation of Officer Locke's dismissal and case closure. She stared at the paper a long while, not because she didn't understand it, but because it made her realize something painful. This was all the closure she was ever going to get. Memory. She closed her eyes. She was back in that windowless room. The sound of her own heartbeat, the pressure behind her ribs, the feeling of her hands clenching to protect what little dignity she had left. His voice, sharp and different, full of disdain. "Take it off." She opened her eyes again. The image of him still flickered like an afterimage burned into memory. Not because of what he did, but because of what he refused to do afterward. Own it. She reached for her journal, turned to a clean page, and began writing only for herself, the apology that never came. Some people think healing comes when the person who hurt you says they're sorry. But what do you do when they never say it? When they vanish behind legal language and disappear into silence? You accept that their silence is a kind of confession. You accept that truth does not require their permission. I will not carry his shame for him. I will not spend the rest of my life waiting for a letter that may never come. Because the truth is, I walked out of that room whole, and he's still there. Locked inside whatever part of him needed to see pain to feel powerful. That is punishment enough. She closed the notebook, her hands steady now. A soft knock came at her front door. Not urgent, familiar. She rose slowly, walked to the door, and opened it. It was her neighbor, Marjorie, a widow 3 years younger, with silver curls and eyes that always seemed to know more than they let on. She held a dish of sweet potato casserole. "I made too much again," Marjorie said, "and I figured you might need company." Evelyn smiled. "You came at the right time." They sat together on the porch, rocking slowly in the evening breeze. Marjorie asked gently, "Still no word from that man?" Evelyn shook her head. "Not a letter, not a word. Just dust." Marjorie looked out at the pink clouds and said, "Some folks live their whole lives afraid of the truth they created. Better to be the one who spoke it than the one who ran from it." Evelyn nodded. She wasn't bitter, she wasn't broken, and she wasn't waiting anymore. She didn't need his apology to reclaim what he tried to take, because dignity, once remembered, cannot be stripped. And Evelyn Carter remembered exactly who she was. Chapter 13. A Voice for the Voiceless. 6 months later, Spelman College, Atlanta, Georgia. The applause swelled like a wave and then gently settled as Evelyn Carter took the stage. The auditorium was full, rows of young black women, many with notebooks open, eyes wide with anticipation. They'd all seen her viral testimony. Some had replayed it like scripture. And now here she was in person, dressed simply in a dark navy dress, standing behind a lectern bearing the college seal. Evelyn adjusted the microphone. She didn't need notes. I was 74 years old when someone tried to take my dignity, she began, her voice steady. But I'd been carrying it longer than he'd been alive. Laughter rippled through the crowd light, but respectful. I didn't come here today to tell you how to be angry, she continued. I came to tell you how to be whole, even after someone tries to carve pieces out of you. Silence now. Attention sharpened like a held breath. I came to tell you that your voice matters before the cameras arrive. And your power isn't born in protest, it's born in presence. 1 year since the incident after the hearing, Evelyn had been inundated with invitations, interviews, talk shows, books, politics. Some wanted her as a symbol. Others wanted her as a tool. She refused most, but she accepted a few carefully chosen offers, only those where she could speak on her own terms, in her own words, and to people who needed it most. That's how she ended up in lecture halls, high schools, church basements, women's shelters, and legal clinics. Not just telling her story, but listening to theirs. She didn't want fame. She wanted impact. And that meant getting closer to pain, not farther from it. Seminar room in Chicago. Evelyn sat on a panel of 4 women, 2 civil rights attorneys, a college dean, and a formerly incarcerated grandmother named Luan, who had been falsely accused of theft in 1989. Evelyn was the oldest on the panel, but also the sharpest. When a student stood up, voice trembling, and asked, "What do you do when you feel small and scared in rooms full of power?" Evelyn leaned forward and answered, "You breathe. You remember your name. You picture the face of the one who came before you, who never got the chance to speak." She paused, and then you stay in the room. The birth of the Evelyn Carter Foundation. It started small. A local Atlanta nonprofit partnered with Evelyn and her son Thomas to create an advocacy initiative first focused on elder protection in public institutions. Then it grew. Scholarships were added, a legal fund, a traveling workshop series. They called it the Evelyn Carter Foundation. Dignity, safety, voice. Its mission was simple: protect the vulnerable. Educate the powerful. Give the silenced a platform. Maria Torres, now pursuing a degree in civil rights law, joined as a volunteer and later a full-time policy coordinator. She often credited Evelyn's letter for changing the direction of her life, and whenever she introduced Evelyn at events, she ended with, "She taught me that it's never too late to be brave, and never too early to listen." Back in Sacramento, a letter arrives one quiet afternoon. Evelyn received a letter from a young woman in Detroit. The envelope was creased. The handwriting was nervous. Inside, call on dear Mrs. Carter. I'm a 19-year-old waitress. 2 weeks ago, I was stopped and strip searched at a Greyhound station. I cried, but I didn't fight back. I thought maybe I deserved it somehow. Then I saw your video. I don't think I'll ever forget the way you said, "You will not strip me of my dignity." That line saved me. Thank you for speaking when I COULDN. Single quotes. Love. A girl learning to be loud. Evelyn placed the letter in a carved cedar box on her nightstand. It sat next to dozens of others stacked high, full of confessions, gratitude, and truth. Each one a reminder. She hadn't just survived. She'd planted something. That evening, a fireside reflection. Evelyn and Thomas sat on the back porch, wrapped in soft blankets. A low fire crackled in the pit between them. Stars blinked overhead. The cicadas sang their nightly hymn. "You ever think about what would have happened if you didn't text me that day?" Thomas asked softly. Evelyn stared into the flames. "I think about it all the time," she said. "But what I think about more is this: there are still women out there who don't have someone to text, and we've still got work to do for them." Thomas nodded. A pause. Then Evelyn smiled faintly. "But we've come a long way, haven't we?" Her son smiled back. "Yes, Mama, we have." Chapter 14. Truth on Trial. 14 months later, U.S. District Court, Northern California. The courtroom was grand but cold, polished wood, high ceilings, and walls that swallowed even the loudest voices. At the front, the seal of the United States District Court gleamed under the recessed lighting. Towering above the judge's bench like a silent guardian of justice, Evelyn Carter sat quietly in the second row. Not in the witness box, not yet. Her presence alone had sent a quiet hush through the room when she entered. She wasn't a plaintiff, not this time. But she had been called as a key witness in a class action lawsuit filed by 18 elderly individuals, all of whom alleged racial profiling, unlawful searches, and emotional distress by TSA officers over a 5-year period. The case was titled Carter et al. v. Department of Homeland Security. Though Evelyn had not filed the suit herself, her name had become the symbol. The spark, this was the fire. The lead attorney, Melanie Wu, a fierce civil rights litigator in her mid-30s. Melanie Wu stood in front of the judge, delivering her opening statement. Her voice was calm but electric. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the court, we are not here today because of isolated mistakes or rogue employees. We are here because a pattern exists. A pattern that targets our elders, particularly those who are black, brown, or simply different. These citizens were humiliated not because of evidence, but because of appearance. She paused, letting the words settle. And at the center of this story is a woman named Evelyn Carter, whose own encounter with TSA brought national attention to something these plaintiffs have known for far too long. Dignity can be taken without leaving a bruise. All eyes turned to Evelyn. She gave a slow, graceful nod. Testimonies from the forgotten, one by one. The courtroom heard stories that echoed Evelyn's own. Geraldine Mitchell, 81. Handcuffed because her hip replacement set off a scanner. I told them I had metal in my body. They told me, you all say that. Luis Santiago, 76, stopped and searched in front of his granddaughter at Lax. I asked what I did wrong. They said I was acting nervous. I have Parkinson's. Nima Ali, 69, a Somali-born U.S. citizen, forced to remove her hijab. They laughed when I cried. They said, if you have nothing to hide, why hide it? The courtroom grew heavier with each testimony. What once seemed like isolated incidents now formed a haunting pattern. The defense attempted to deflect. TSA officers face high pressure. Split-second decisions. National security must come first, but for once, that argument felt hollow, because Evelyn's story had already changed the narrative. Evelyn takes the stand on the third day of the trial. Evelyn was called. She rose slowly, every step deliberate as she approached the witness stand. Her floral scarf, her pressed slacks, the small gold cross at her throat, she looked every bit the woman the country had come to love. After being sworn in, she folded her hands and waited for the first question. Melanie Wu approached. Mrs. Carter, she began gently, would you tell the court why you're here today, not as a plaintiff, but as a voice? Evelyn nodded, then leaned forward into the microphone. Because these people didn't have sons in uniform. Because they didn't have cameras in the hallway. Because they were just as innocent as me, just not as visible. Melanie asked, do you believe your story helped bring theirs to light? Evelyn paused, then said, no, they were already in the light. The system just refused to see them. I was a mirror, that's all. Do you believe this court can deliver justice? Evelyn's answer came without hesitation. Justice doesn't erase the past, but it can prevent it from becoming someone else's future. The cross-examination, defense attorney, a clean-cut, silver-tongued man named Mr. Denton rose from his seat, stepping forward with respectful but rehearsed confidence. Mrs. Carter, with all due respect, would you agree that what happened to you was an unfortunate mistake by one individual? Evelyn didn't flinch. I'd agree it started with one man, but it was allowed by many. He pressed, you were cleared. You were apologized to. The officer was punished. Doesn't that show the system works? She looked at him steadily. No, sir. It shows the system responded to a scandal. Not that it protects people, not yet. He blinked, thrown by her clarity. There was no rattling Evelyn Carter, national. Coverage of the trial dominated the media. CNN ran the headline, "Justice in the Air. 'Tis a discrimination trial takes center stage." The New York Times published an op-ed titled, "When Airports Become Courtrooms, Evelyn Carter and the Fight for Federal Reform." Hashtags re-emerged. Hashtag her name is Evelyn, hashtag truth on trial, hashtag dignity by default. Talk shows, podcasts, and legal forums all echoed the same sentiment. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a referendum on how America sees its elders, its people of color, its conscience. A quiet moment before the verdict, back at her hotel room, Evelyn sat in silence, staring out at the city skyline. Thomas poured her a cup of green tea and set it beside her. "Whatever happens in that courtroom," he said gently, "you've already changed the world." Evelyn looked at him. "No," she said, "they did. I just lit the torch." Chapter 15. The Verdict. U.S. District Court, Northern California. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back row. Legal interns balanced laptops on their knees. Plaintiffs sat shoulder to shoulder, their families beside them, holding hands, whispering quiet prayers. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the world waited beyond those walls. At the front, Judge Marilyn DeSoto entered in her black robe, flanked by U.S. Marshals. A quiet hush fell over the room, as if every breath had been collectively drawn. And held in place. Evelyn Carter sat just behind the plaintiff's table, her scarf neatly draped, her posture upright. Her hands rested in her lap. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She had waited for this moment, not for herself, but for the 18 voices seated in front of her. This was their verdict, and she was their witness. The judge speaks. Judge DeSoto adjusted her glasses and began reading, slowly and deliberately. In the matter of Carter et al., v. Department of Homeland Security, the court finds in favor of the plaintiffs. A wave of gasps swept across the room, based on a preponderance of the evidence indicating that the Transportation Security Administration, acting through specific officers and systemic failings in policy enforcement, violated constitutional protections against unlawful search and discrimination. Tears, audible sobs. Hands reached across rows and locked fingers tightly. But Judge DeSoto wasn't done. The court hereby orders a federal settlement in the amount of $6.2 million to be divided among the plaintiffs, the implementation of a permanent independent civilian oversight committee for TSA policy complaints, and the institution of a new federal training mandate, the Carter Standard, aimed at preventing racial and age-based profiling in all federally operated transit hubs. The Carter Standard. Those words echoed. The courtroom stilled as they registered. Evelyn blinked. She wasn't expecting that. Thomas gently squeezed her shoulder. "Your name just became policy," he whispered. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted when the news broke. Cheers, applause, reporters shouting for quotes. Banners reading, "We believe elders," and "Dignity wins" were held high. Legal analysts stood on courthouse steps breaking down the decision like sports commentators after a historic game. When Evelyn finally emerged through the doors, flashbulbs popped like fireworks. A reporter shouted, "Mrs. Carter, how does it feel to know the federal government has adopted your name for a new national policy?" Evelyn paused. Then, into the microphone, she said, "I never asked for a law. I just wanted to keep my clothes on and be treated like a human being. But if my name helps protect someone else from what I went through, then maybe this whole painful chapter wasn't just mine to carry." The plaintiff's Geraldine Mitchell wept openly and hugged Evelyn with trembling arms. "I thought nobody would believe an old lady," she whispered. Evelyn smiled. "We're not just old ladies, we're survivors." Luis Santiago called his daughter on FaceTime, showing her the court building behind him. "Mia," he said, "they heard us. Finally." Later that night, in her hotel room, Evelyn sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. A glass of water in one hand, her other resting on the chair's arm. Calm and quiet, She didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She simply sat in peace for the first time in over a year. Inside, Thomas watched her from behind the window. He didn't disturb her. He knew that this moment, this silence was her ceremony. She had climbed the mountain. Now she was standing on the other side of it. In homes across American news anchors spoke in hushed, reverent tones. In a historic verdict today, a federal judge ruled in favor of a group of elderly plaintiffs who were profiled and harassed at American airports. The decision, now being hailed as a landmark civil rights ruling, will include reforms known as the Carter Standard. For many watching at home, older black women, widows, grandmothers, retired workers, there were no cheers. Only stillness. Only quiet tears. Because they recognized her. They had been her. And now, finally, they'd been seen. Back in Montgomery Airport, 1 year later, a young black grandmother stood in line at security. She walked through the scanner. It beeped. An officer stepped forward, calm, kind, professional. "No problem at all, ma'am. Just a quick wand pass. We'll keep you comfortable." As he gently waved the wand over her back, she noticed a small bronze plaque hanging above the inspection area, in honor of Evelyn Carter. Let every traveler be treated with the dignity they carried when they arrived. The grandmother smiled, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel afraid. Chapter 16. Full circle. 2 months after the verdict, Sacramento, California. The morning breeze was soft against Evelyn Carter's cheek as she stepped onto her porch, her small watering can in hand. The petunias in the corner pot were just starting to bloom again. Purple, yellow, and proud. Life had begun to slow down, not because it had to, but because she wanted it that way. The press had quieted. The foundation now ran with a full team of professionals. Maria Torres was thriving in law school. The Carter Standard had passed a second round of policy reviews and was being piloted in train stations and ferry ports. It was the season of return, of planting, of stillness. Evelyn poured water gently over the roots, humming the same old hymn her mother used to sing on Sundays. When she turned back toward the door, she noticed a white envelope tucked beneath the welcome mat. She paused, bent down, picked it up. There was no return address, just a single name printed on the front. In simple penmanship, Evelyn Carter. The letter, she opened it slowly, like she was unwrapping something too sacred to rush. Inside, a single sheet of paper creased, careful, written in black ink, the letters evenly spaced, like the writer had practiced. Below the salutation, her eyes caught the name first. Raymond Locke. She sat down on the porch bench before continuing. Mrs. Carter, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a reply. But I owe you the one thing I never gave, the truth. I have no excuse for how I treated you. I wasn't tired. I wasn't confused. I wasn't just doing my job. I was angry at everything, at my life, at the system. And I used my uniform to control something because I couldn't control anything else. But none of that explains what I did. And it doesn't undo it. What I did to you was wrong, cruel, dehumanizing. You didn't deserve any of it. I saw your face on the news later. I heard your voice in that hearing. I watched the trial from a couch I didn't earn. And every word you said peeled something off of me I'd buried for decades. I've lost my job, my badge, my reputation, but I gained something too. A reason to ask the question, what kind of man do I want to be now that no one is watching? I'm working at a halfway house now in Tulsa. Part-time volunteer, mostly sweeping floors. No one there knows who I was. I don't tell them. But when I see someone who's hurting, I try to be kind. It's not enough. It never will be, but I needed you to know. You changed me. And I am sorry. Our Locke. Evelyn's reaction, she stared at the letter for a long time. Longer than she expected. Not because she didn't believe it, but because part of her thought it might never come. The apology she had surrendered years ago had found its way home. Not through the courts, not through headlines, but through accountability born in silence. She folded the letter, pressed it against her heart, and whispered aloud, "God, thank you for giving me the patience to live long enough to see this." Later that week, a quiet talk with Thomas. They sat under the oak tree in her backyard, sipping lemonade. Birds chirped. The sprinkler ticked rhythmically on the lawn. Evelyn handed him the letter. Thomas read it slowly, his brow tightening, jaw still. He finally spoke. "You gonna write back?" Evelyn shook her head gently. "No, I think he's doing the work already. My words wouldn't change that. You believe he's sincere?" "I believe he's beginning." Returning to the airport one morning in early spring, Evelyn put on her travel coat, her comfortable shoes, and stepped through the automatic doors of Montgomery Airport once more. She wasn't flying. She wasn't speaking. She was simply visiting. Inside, the atmosphere felt different, now more attentive. Staff wore badges with new emblems. An older black woman behind the TSA desk spotted Evelyn and immediately stood up straighter. "Mrs. Carter," she said, a soft smile forming. "It's an honor." Evelyn smiled back. "You just make sure the next woman like me doesn't have to fight so hard. That's the real honor." She walked through the atrium. Where once she had been humiliated, now she walked tall. Not as a symbol, not as a case number, but as a free woman who left the room with her name intact. The porch. Again, at sunset, as golden light fell across the porch swing, Evelyn sat with her journal and opened to a fresh page. She didn't write about Locke, or the foundation, or the court. She wrote only 5 words. "God kept me for this." Then she closed the book, smiled softly, and let the silence finish the sentence. Chapter 17. Echoes of Change. Spring, 2 years after the incident. World didn't change overnight. But it changed. Not through declarations or breaking news, but through whispers in classrooms, policies on paper, youth-led movements, and everyday people watching how they treated others. In quiet corners of the country, Evelyn Carter's name was still spoken. Not like a celebrity, not like a historical figure, but like a warning, a reminder, and for some a roadmap. Chicago, Illinois. Law school classroom. A young woman raised her hand during a civil rights seminar at the University of Chicago. Her braids fell over her shoulder as she spoke. "I'd like to discuss the Carter case in relation to Fourth Amendment violations. It's not just about physical searches. It's about psychological dignity." The professor nodded. "And what's the precedent?" She smiled, confident. "Carter v. DHS, 2024. The federal ruling that created what is now called the Carter Standard. It's taught in every federal training academy now." Around the room, students scribbled notes. Some had grown up hearing about Evelyn on the news. Others had only discovered her in textbooks. But each of them saw her name not as a victim, but as a reformer. Los Angeles, California, middle school assembly. In a sunlit school gym, a guest speaker stood before a group of 7th graders. Maria Torres. No longer wearing a a uniform, now dressed in a fitted blazer and jeans, law degree pinned on her lapel. She was radiant, confident, alive. She held up a printed photo of Evelyn, projected on the screen behind her. "This woman taught me how to speak when it's hard," Maria said. "She taught me that silence may keep your job, but it costs your soul. And she forgave me before I even asked for it." A black girl in the front row whispered to her classmate, "She looks like my grandma." And in that moment, Evelyn Carter became more than a woman. She became a mirror. Washington, D.C. National Archive. A small exhibit had been quietly added to a civil rights wing of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Display case. Inside it, Evelyn's scarf, a printed copy of her congressional testimony, a sign that once hung above Montgomery Airport security. "All persons will be treated with dignity under the Carter Standard." A plaque read, "Evelyn Carter, defender of dignity, ordinary citizen, extraordinary stand. Her voice redefined how a nation viewed its elders, its women, and its conscience. Families passed by slowly. Some cried. Some whispered stories of their own grandmothers. One little girl tugged her father's sleeve and asked, "Daddy, what did she do?" And he answered, "She reminded America who it's supposed to be." Back in Sacramento, Evelyn's home, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with two teenage girls from the Foundation's Youth Justice Fellowship. They'd come over for lemon cake and mentorship. One of them, a soft-spoken poet named Anya, asked, "Miss Evelyn, how do you stay strong after something like that?" Evelyn sipped her tea and replied gently, "You don't always stay strong. Sometimes you fall apart. But you learn to fall on something bigger than fear. You fall on faith, on purpose, on legacy." Anya nodded, scribbling in her notebook. The other girl, Kayla, asked, "Did you ever feel like giving up?" Evelyn smiled, not giving up, just sitting down. "But every time I tried, God sent someone who needed me to stand one more day." The girls stared at her awed. Reverend Dot and Evelyn saw it clearly in their eyes. The torch had passed Dot in the air, a small gesture that spoke volumes. Flight from Houston to Denver. An elderly black man in a wheelchair approached TSA Dot the young officer, barely 25, smiled and knelt beside him. "Sir," she said warmly, "I'll explain each step. Nothing invasive. You're safe with me." The man's eyes filled slightly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded article, yellowed and worn. A headline. "Evelyn Carter's voice moves Congress. You trained under that standard?" He asked quietly. The officer nodded. "She made sure I did." Full circle in the years that followed, Evelyn Carter never stopped teaching. Not from a chalkboard, not from a podium, but from the life she lived after the wound. She wrote letters to survivors, spoke at funerals for women she'd never met, started a grant program for young girls raised by grandmothers, and visited her favorite airport terminal every year, just to watch people pass through in peace. She didn't need fame. She didn't need a statue. She had already etched her legacy into the one place no one could erase it, the conscience of a nation. Chapter 18. The last journey 3 years after the incident, Sacramento International Airport. The airport looked different now, not because the walls were repainted or the terminals had changed, but because Evelyn Carter was walking through it with a lightness she hadn't known in decades. She moved slowly, carefully, her rolling suitcase clicking softly behind her. Thomas insisted she let him drive her to the terminal, but she had politely refused. This journey, this last one, she wanted to take on her own terms. As she approached the TSA checkpoint, a young officer stood at attention. Her badge read, "C. Williams, TSA Mrs. Carter," the officer said gently, stepping forward. "It's a true honor. May I assist you?" Evelyn smiled warmly, eyes crinkling. "No need, child. I've done this before. Just help me with the tray." As her shoes came off and her small purse passed through the belt, Officer Williams asked quietly, "Where are you headed, ma'am?" Evelyn replied with a small laugh, "Home. The flight to Birmingham, Alabama." Evelyn settled into her window seat, wrapped in a soft shawl. The flight attendants recognized her. Some offered water, others offered quiet admiration. But Evelyn waved it off with a grandmother's grace. "I'm just another passenger today," she said. "Let the babies have the attention." As the plane took off and pierced through the clouds, she looked out at the endless horizon. Below her, the country moved quietly, fields, roads, rivers. And time. The purpose of her journey, this wasn't a speaking tour, not a ceremony, not a court case or a foundation meeting. This was personal. A few months ago, Evelyn had received news that shook her gently but surely. Her health was declining. The doctors were kind, but honest. Her heart, they said, had been strong, but it had also carried too much for too long. She didn't tell many people. She didn't want the sorrow. She didn't want pity. What she wanted was to spend her final chapter in the place that first taught her how to endure. Montgomery, Alabama, where she had been born, where she had first marched for voting rights, where she had buried her mother, where she would return not to fight, but to rest. Arrival in Montgomery. When the wheels touched the tarmac at Montgomery Airport, Evelyn closed her eyes and smiled. She stepped off the plane and walked through the terminal slowly. Not one TSA officer looked at her with suspicion. Instead, a young man approached her, gently offered his hand and said, "Ma'am, I'm an officer here. We have a plaque with your name at checkpoint 3. It's changed how we treat people. You should see it." Evelyn chuckled. "I already have. In the way you just spoke to me." Settling in her childhood home had been gone for decades, but a family friend, Miss Delilah, now in her 80s, had prepared a guest room in her quiet farmhouse. Just outside the city, the days moved slowly. Evelyn read old journals, answered letters, fed the chickens, watched the sun rise through trees she once climbed as a girl. In the afternoons, she sat on the porch with sweet tea and looked out at the Alabama sky. It was wide and eternal, like the peace she had waited so long to feel. One final letter on her last night, Evelyn sat at the small wooden writing desk in her guest room. She pulled out a sheet of paper and her favorite pen. She began, "To my grandchildren, and their children, and whoever else might read this someday. If you're reading this, I've finally taken the one journey where you can't follow me just yet. But don't be sad. I didn't leave in anger. I didn't leave afraid. I left full of stories. Full of forgiveness. Full of the kind of quiet that comes when your name no longer trembles on someone else's tongue. I want you to remember this. They will try to take your voice, your softness, your joy. But don't let them have your dignity. That's yours. Given by God, not government. And when it's your turn to speak, do it with grace, so sharp it cuts through history. With love, Grandma Evelyn." She folded the letter, placed it in a sealed envelope, and set it on the nightstand beside her Bible. Next morning, Miss Delilah found her just after dawn, sitting peacefully in her rocker, wrapped in a shawl, eyes closed, with a soft smile on her face. A journal rested on her lap. She had simply drifted away. No fear, no pain, just peace. The world remembers. The news of her passing rippled across the country like a bell ringing in slow, solemn waves. Evelyn Carter, the woman who changed airport policy and redefined dignity, has passed at age 78. Tributes poured in. Flags at Montgomery Airport flew at half-staff. TSA officers across the country wore navy blue ribbons on their badges. Students left flowers at the Civil Rights exhibit in D.C. In homes, thousands of them, people watched her final interview on replay, whispering to themselves, "She made us better." Epilogue. A name that lingers years later at the foot of a statue in a newly opened National Museum of Dignity and Civil Justice. A little girl tugged her father's hand. "Who was Evelyn Carter, Daddy?" He smiled. She was a woman who refused to be silent. And because she spoke, the world had to listen. Chapter 19. The legacy grows. 6 months after Evelyn Carter's passing, a quiet breeze rolled through the steps of the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. Dozens of people stood outside, young, old, students in uniform, activists holding signs, retired citizens in wheelchairs. Some held pictures of Evelyn Carter. Others wore buttons bearing her initials, etched in gold on navy blue ribbons. At the center of the crowd, Maria Torres stood at the microphone, the podium steady beneath her palms. Her voice, once hesitant and unsure, now rang with purpose. "We're not just here to honor a woman who made history. We're here to finish what she started." Behind her, banners waved. "The Carter Standard is just the start. Protect our elders. Dignity is a right, not a privilege." Maria's rise. Maria had changed. No longer an invisible TSA On a forgotten shift, she was now the executive director of the Evelyn Carter Foundation, leading a national movement for dignity rights. She'd graduated law school with top honors. She testified before Congress. She helped write legislation aimed at protecting elderly travelers, disabled passengers, and non-native English speakers from invasive screenings and discrimination. Her voice was the voice of reform, but more importantly, it was the voice Evelyn had believed in before anyone else did. Thomas Carter, a son becomes a builder, while Maria championed federal change. Thomas Carter worked locally. He stepped down from his post in the military after 25 years of decorated service. Many questioned it. He answered them all the same. My mother gave this country more in 2 hours than I've given it in 2 decades. It's my turn to serve in her shadow. Thomas helped establish Carter House, a transitional living space for elderly women recently released from incarceration or those displaced by housing discrimination. He partnered with social workers, faith leaders, and volunteers to provide safe beds, warm meals, and legal services. At the grand opening, he stood in front of a simple mural painted on the side of the building, a close-up of Evelyn's eyes. Watching, fierce yet gentle, he whispered, "Still protecting us, Mama." Young voices, Anya and Kayla, the 2 teenage girls who had once visited Evelyn for mentorship, were now leaders in their own right. Anya, the soft-spoken poet, published a collection of spoken-word pieces titled Rooms They Tried to Lock, dedicated to Evelyn. It sold thousands of copies online and was taught in high school English classrooms as part of a unit on modern activism. Kayla launched a YouTube channel called Dignity Dialogue, interviewing elders across America about their untold experiences with systemic bias. The tagline was simple: "We ask because no one else did." On the first anniversary of Evelyn's passing, the girls returned to her porch in Montgomery, now preserved as part of the Carter Heritage Trail. They sat on the same swing where she once wrote her last letter, and they left behind flowers and a thank you card. The Carter Fellowship applications for the Carter Fellowship tripled. The foundation had started with 10 youth mentors. Now it had over 100. Programs had spread to 42 states, offering training in civic engagement, human rights law, and public service ethics. Many of the applicants were children of immigrants, grandchildren of veterans, teenagers raised by grandmothers who once sat in silence but now demanded respect. One new Carter Fellow, a Muslim girl from Detroit named Zainab, said during orientation, "I never met her, but I read her story, and it made me feel like I existed before I was noticed. That's the kind of story I want to write with my life." The law that bore her name, a bill passed quietly through Congress in the spring of the following year, co-sponsored by both parties. It was titled the Carter Dignity Act. It required annual cultural competency training for all federal transportation agents, mandated privacy-first search protocols, and funded legal counsel for seniors filing discrimination claims. No one shouted during the signing. There were no fireworks, just a single framed portrait of Evelyn behind the president's desk and a nation slowly trying to catch up with her example. A closing reflection in a church in Montgomery. During a Sunday service marking Evelyn's birthday, a pastor stood before a packed congregation. He spoke slowly. She didn't raise her fists. She raised her eyes. She didn't storm buildings. She opened doors. She didn't ask to be remembered. But we will never forget her. And from the back pew, a little girl whispered to her brother, "I want to be like her." The legacy had grown roots, and from it a forest of change began to bloom. Chapter 20. The name they tried to break 2 years after Evelyn Carter's passing. Washington, D.C. The Capitol Rotunda stood silent, solemn, and flooded with soft morning light. At its center, a casket lay not adorned in gold or velvet, but in a deep navy blue drape with a single white lily resting on top. It was flanked by 2 flags, the American flag and the Civil Rights banner from the 1965 Selma March, A small plaque at the base read, Evelyn Marie Carter, 1945, 2026. She did not ask for power. She walked in truth. The rotunda had only ever honored a handful of civilians in this way, and now Evelyn Carter had become one of them. The final tribute. The president stood before the gathered crowd: senators, judges, teachers, TSA officers, activists, schoolchildren, and thousands watching via broadcast. When Evelyn Carter walked into an airport, they tried to strip her of her dignity. When she stood before this nation, she clothed it in conscience. And when she passed, she left behind not sorrow, but a new standard of humanity. He placed his hand over his heart. They tried to break her name, but in the end, her name broke. The silence. From ashes to anthem all across the country that day. Say checkpoints held a minute of silence. Public schools played her final speech. Civil rights museums unfurled banners reading, "Say her name because she made hers matter." And inside homes, in kitchens and living rooms, people spoke of Evelyn Carter the way older generations once spoke of Rosa Parks, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Maya Angelou, not just as a story. As a standard. Montgomery, Alabama, the renaming later. That year, the Montgomery Regional Airport unveiled its new name. The Evelyn M. Carter International Terminal. A statue of her now stood in the main entrance, eyes focused forward, hands open by her side, scarf draped around her shoulders just as it had been the day of the incident. At the dedication, Thomas stood before the crowd. "I used to think my mother was just ordinary," he said, voice cracking, "but then I realized it takes something extraordinary to stay human in a world that tries to make you small. My mother didn't just survive injustice. She made justice answer for it." The Carter Scholarship, funded by small donations and major endowments. The Carter Dignity Scholarship launched nationwide, offering full tuition to first-generation college students pursuing careers in civil rights law, social work, and community organizing. Its tagline came from Evelyn's own words: "Dignity is not a gift from the system. It is a promise we must keep to one another." A name written in every corner. Years later, in a classroom in rural Iowa, a history teacher asked, "Who can name one person whose courage reshaped the way our public systems treat elders and minorities?" A student raised her hand. Evelyn Carter. The teacher smiled. "And what do we learn from her?" The girl answered without hesitation, "That when the system sees you as a problem, speak like you're the solution." Final passage. Evelyn's last journal entry, found years later in her nightstand, was one final, unfinished journal page. It wasn't a speech or a plan. It was a simple message, scrawled in her neat, careful handwriting. "They tried to shame my skin. They tried to question my age. They tried to reduce my name to a file in a hallway, but I kept my voice. I kept my name. And now so will they." The legacy. Eternal. Evelyn Carter's life began in a segregated South. She worked 40 years in a hospital, raised a son who led soldiers, and became a household name after they tried to humiliate her in a room without windows. But she left behind more than memory. She left behind a standard, a structure, and a spirit one that would live on every time someone said, "Ma'am, we respect your dignity." Let Evelyn's story be a reminder: dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. Always treat every traveler, every elder, every person with the respect you hope to receive. Because sometimes justice starts in the smallest moment. Like, share, subscribe for more emotional, real-life stories that matter. *The end.